Oh, thank you so much for joining us on the second of the IIEA webinar discussion series. This one is our first panel discussion, and as you might know by now, every second Wednesday at this time, we will have one webinar, and the webinars for the next few sessions are already available online on iraneconomics.org/webinar. And please get in touch if you have any ideas about any topics that you would like to discuss, and we shall also announce some of the webinars for January, February, and March in the next couple of weeks. So I'll hand over to Mohammad Reza Farzanegan, who is a board member of IIEA, who today is chairing our session. And please make use of the Q&A function to ask questions and chat to have a discussion amongst ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamiar, for introduction. Hello, everybody, and very welcome to our today panel on the natural disaster management in Iran. So this is the first IIEA panel after the keynote of Professor Pesaran last month on the sanctions. So we are very happy that IIEA has initiated this series of webinars on different topics related to the sustainable development of Iran, and the disaster management is one of them, and the way that the institutions and the government is dealing with this problem, which is happening in Iran frequently, unfortunately. And today we look at this issue of natural disaster from different perspectives, from a perspective of urban planning, urban management, and disaster management as far as that is related to the socio-economic aspects of this issue. And moreover, we also looking at the health system in Iran under the disaster. So in today's panel, we have three experts who share with us their experience from the real experience from the field in Iran, based on their long-term interaction with the topic of natural disaster from a variety of perspectives. We have three experts which kindly accepted our invitation to join this panel. So I would like to thank all of them for the kind acceptance of invitation to join this panel. After a brief introduction, so each of them will share with us their insights on this topic for about 15 minutes, and we are planning for a 30 minutes question and answer at the end of these three presentations. So I will briefly introduce our speakers, who we start with Dr. Farnaz Arefian, and then we continue with Dr. Pooya Alaedini and Dr. Abbas Ostadtaghizadeh, who will be our third presenter. So if you let me very briefly, I introduce each of these three speakers, and then we start the presentation of these three speakers. The first talk is by Dr. Farnaz Arefian on the post-disaster reconstruction process in Iran, which is a good introduction to the topic from the let's say general perspective, from theoretical perspective, and the experience of reconstruction process in Iran from somebody who have been involved in this process for several years. Dr. Arefian is the director of Silk Cities and is also associated with Bartlett Development Planning Unit in University College London. Her professional life combines industry experience with academic and public engagement experiences in United Kingdom, Middle East, Central Southeast Asia. Her post-disaster reconstruction experience was featured in guiding for humanitarian organizations worldwide. She has authored several books. From them, one can mention the book on organizing post-disaster reconstruction process, published by Springer in 2018, and a new book which is published in current year on the historic cities in the face of disasters. She got her PhD, which was an interdisciplinary PhD in the field of development planning from University College London, and moreover, her earlier studies in the field of urban design and development was in Philipps-Universität. After Dr. Arefian presentation, we continue with Pooya Alaedini. Pooya Alaedini is the associate professor in University of Tehran, Department of Development and Social Policy. He has authored several books and many articles on the issue of informal settlement and the development issues in Iran. Among them, I can mention the book on industrial trade and employment policies in Iran, another book on the topic of economic welfare and inequality in Iran, which I had the pleasure of cooperating in this book with him and co-editing that. Basically, his experience besides this disaster management is also being in studying the informal settlement in Iran for international organizations such as the World Bank and United Nations. He got his PhD in urban planning and policy development from Rutgers University. His graduate degree were in economics and engineering. And our third speaker, Dr. Abbas Ostadtaghizadeh, he's giving us more insight on the health systems on the disaster in Iran. He has a very extensive experience in the field of health and medical situation during the disaster and post-disaster. Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh is a medical doctor. He has a master in public health and a PhD in disaster and emergency health. He is an assistant professor at the moment in Tehran University of Medical Science and the head of disaster and emergency health department in that place. In addition, he has cooperated with the Iranian Red Crescent Society as a president advisor, and Tehran Disaster Mitigation Management Organization as a senior advisor. Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh worked as a vice president of Tehran Disaster Organization, general director of health department and in Tehran municipality. He introduced several community-based initiatives, particularly in the case of establishing healthcare centers in Tehran neighborhoods. He was the Dean of Disaster Management Center, University of Applied Science and Technology in Tehran, as well as the president of Tehran Disaster Resilience Center. He has conducted several research and projects for international organizations for United Nations Development Program and International Committee of Red Cross. And we are very happy that all these colleagues and experts basically are here and would like to share their practical insight on the disaster management in Iran. And I give the floor to Dr. Arefian to start her presentation on the issue which I mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mohammad and Kamiar, for your kind invitation. So let me share the screen with everyone. So can everyone see it? Okay.
Yes.
Now? Okay, that's great. Okay. What I want to talk about is about the implementation, basically linking policy to practice mainly. And I'd like to be kind of storytelling and starting with providing a global view and positioning Iran in that global scene. And let's see, and take it from there. And then I talk about the case of BAM, which as you mentioned, I was in practice working there. So the state of art, since 1990s, we know that the global community came to the understanding that disasters are not basically natural. I know the subject of webinar is natural disasters, but you know, disasters are connected with vulnerability, risk, and most importantly, development failures. And so the shifting of perspective from disaster management, so the reactive approach to proactive approach of disaster risk reduction through initiatives and in tools, strategies in development. And as I'm sure that all of us know that, you know, the Hyogo framework and the 4 priorities for Sendai framework, which sees reconstruction as a major step for building back better, basically identifying reconstruction as a agent for change, basically agent for improvements. So where is Iran in this context? Iran has lots of experience in post-disaster reconstruction, from Boin Zahra long time ago to Manjil, and in between the post-war reconstruction. The organizational continuity that we see in Iran actually enabled Iran to accumulate knowledge, the know-how, which is very valuable. So developing broad policies during the Manjil earthquake and understanding very correctly the important role and the of people's participation for sharing not only responsibility, but making sure that people have their say in whatever is going to be reconstructed. And of course, managing the scale. So dividing the earthquake hit area to a number of zones and mobilizing the national capacity to work on, so each province to work to take over one zone and work on that based on the initial principles that the reconstruction manager actually introduces. And maybe like many other places, after each major disaster, we see some institutional, more importantly, institutional improvement. For example, after the Manjil earthquake, we had the creation of a construction engineering organization for regulating all construction activities. And so the approach that Iran was having for managing the scale later on was introduced as area-based approach, you know, the location-based approach at the international actually scene. But this is actually, you know, more or less rural reconstruction. We are now living in a more complex world. We are now, and our disasters are becoming more complex and complex. So the world is becoming urban. Iran, 75% urban. It's an urban country. And not only that, we are having some scenes, you know, historic cities or other kind of, you know, environmental diversity that Iran has, like many other places in the world. Our disasters at global level is becoming more complex because of, you know, the more frequency of disasters in urban area, large scales, and so the dynamic interactions of these forces, how should we deal with them? The thing is that the global community, you know, academics, practitioners, international organizations, they all focusing on what? We need to have a safe construction. The reconstruction should be agent of change, should provide improvement in this, in that, but the question of how still remains. And this is the global challenge. And in this sense, actually, Iran, unfortunately, is the 4th disaster-prone country in the world. And because of its, you know, long history, because of the cultural heritage that it has, because of the environmental diversity that different cities in Iran have, Iran faces the full global, actually, complexities of these disastrous challenges. One case that can exemplify this is the BAM experience and the BAM disaster. So as you know, on Boxing Day 2003, a very strong earthquake happened. And as we say in disaster management, an earthquake, a flood, these kind of natural incidents, they are not disaster. You know, the building kills, earthquake doesn't kill. And so a disaster is like a surgery knife that exposes developmental failures, shortfalls, and then we need to deal with that. So similar to that, the BAM earthquake exposed the shortfalls and shortcomings in urban development in BAM. The safe construction, BAM didn't have it, actually. Regulation, yes, it was. After the Manjil earthquake, the 2800 regulation, we have this, for earthquake-resistant buildings, but the inspection was not there. So the earthquake exposed this problem. And from the other side, suddenly, after the disaster, everyone noticed that, oh my God, BAM was a wonder, had a wonderful cultural heritage. We ignored it, and I think it's very sad that we need to wait for a disaster to happen, and then we acknowledge and recognize the value that we had. But anyway, it happened, and so BAM was recognized as the World Heritage, actually, site after the disaster. And the thing is that around 80% of the built environment collapsed during the BAM earthquake. And so from previous experiences, we knew that people should be involved. Then reconstruction should provide improvements. So safe construction should be there for reconstruction. The built heritage, the same improvement was expected from the reconstruction with regards to safeguarding the cultural heritage. The thing that everyone was saying it should be acknowledged. So the housing reconstruction in BAM, actually the whole reconstruction, not only the housing reconstruction, the reconstruction of BAM was defined based on 3 objectives: safeguarding cultural heritage, having earthquake-resistant buildings, and of course, people should be involved and should be mobilized and participate. So it was the first main attempt of Iran to urbanize reconstruction. From relatively successful Manjil, mostly rural reconstruction, it was the first attempt to deal with one of those challenges, global challenges, urbanizing reconstruction. So when we are talking about urban system, we are talking about urban governance, the existing process for example, for housing. Now I talk about housing because when we are bringing people in, when we are talking about participatory reconstruction, it has the full complexities. So what they did, actually, it was very innovative. They said that the housing development process in BAM, like all other cities in Iran, it has a certain process. We have a design stage, we have a construction stage, planning permission, planning application, planning design, planning permission, construction phase. So, and we have 3 objectives: cultural heritage, safe construction, and so and so. So where within this process we can inject those qualities? if the inspection was not good before the earthquake, where in this process we can bring the inspection about earthquake-resistant building, where we can introduce new design codes for safeguarding architectural identity of the urban fabric. It was innovative, and it had its own advantages, because, for example, when we are modifying and improving an existing system, in fact, we are making it easier to link it back to urban development after the reconstruction process. We are engaging local institutions as well. So it had a number of advantages in it. So for those elements, for those qualities that were new in the housing process, of course, a number of organizations should have been involved. For example, for dealing with the scale, the area base that I said Iran was experienced in, each setat from each province came on board. Mazandaran province took one neighborhood in Ban and created an administrative unit. A number of consultancy companies, which the company I had back then in Iran, were involved in design phase and helping people in the same zone, same neighborhood, in one neighborhood, to help them for the design process. And BHRC, the research institute, and of course for the earthquake-resistant organizations to control, the Kermanshah construction organization to control the structural aspect of safe construction and everything. So a number of additional organizations came in, and it became a mega system. It is a mega system, multi-organization, and so what on paper everything is good. We have a number of objectives very clearly linked with the developmental shortfalls or visions that we are having. We want to improve it, which is good. And we introduce it for each objective. We consider, okay, who should be involved? We bring it on board. That's good. But in practice, it didn't work as it was expected. Why? A number of issues emerged, which in my view, they could have been prevented if there was kind of attention to organizational architecture of things. For example, imagine that for two objectives, safeguarding heritage and safe construction, in the beginning, everyone worked together. A number of typologies were produced to start the work. But soon after the putting everything in practice, it changed. One controller, one organization who was in control of the structure actually made it much restricted and much tougher, even more than the national regulation. Because when we think after a disaster is a blame game, and structure actually the organization was under pressure because of the blame game, and we see the disciplinary, narrow-minded approach that some of these controlling organizations showed. It created backlogs, bottlenecks, lengthy processes. So people supposed to participate, people were participating, but the process becoming long and long. And the reconstruction management had to create some kind of very creative problem solving, creating portfolios of design, which were both architectural, structural, and otherwise they are accepted, they were acceptable. And we also saw a number of unfinished structures. And a number of, and I tell you why did it happen. And in the middle of that, we see that the way funds were released in the beginning, it became more relaxed and relaxed. For example, in the beginning, the fund was released based on the reports. And after a number of, months and some issues, we saw that it didn't happen. So before reports, they had to release the funds. So to make people continue their works, basically. And at another time, we saw that the reconstruction system itself became vulnerable. So basically, some people took advantage of the system and got more funds, built more. And what I want to, so a number of issues. And of course, during this practical work, reconstruction management had to deal with it. So solutions were found, for example, for the portfolio of architectural acceptable typologies. I'm talking about participatory housing reconstruction, because for other kind of public buildings, public sector reconstruction, they don't resemble programs. They were much easier in a sense, because they don't, it's like other projects. You have a client, you have a consultancy, you have a contractor, you have the work. It's not as complex as having a participatory program. And what I think the reconstruction of BAM, and not only reconstruction of BAM, in my view, most urban development programs in Iran, they lack is the adequate attention to organizational architecture that links policy to practice. Let me go through that and bring, the issues that I mentioned linked with this organizational architecture. Imagine we have a program with 3 objectives, which is complex. A program with 1 objective is easier than a program with 2 objectives. Nevertheless, 3 objectives. In L'Aquila, Italy, they even didn't get close to having 3 objectives. They came up with 2 objectives. But when on paper, we just, as a bullet point, 1, 2, 3, this is at the very top level. But in practice, we are talking about the same object, 1 house. At operational level, the practical considerations for achieving each of those objectives, of course, they should have interactions, overlaps. And these overlaps was missing in the BAM case. So if we think, a strategic way in defining objectives, in defining the vertical, basically cascading, identifying organizations for each objective, it was good. But for thinking about how these objectives work together, it was missing. So they were treated fragmented. So one is this, another one. So if we see this one, the zoning for BAM, for the managing the scale, each zone has its own setup, its own consultancy company, its own, its own administrative unit of reconstruction, which is good. But what was missing was contractors. In the beginning, it was expected that big contractors would come. But what was missing was that the same, for contractors, it didn't have the same zoning, the same area-based unit. So for each of these areas, one consultancy, one setup, we could not work in other neighborhoods. one setup could not work in 2 neighborhoods, but one contractor could work in whatever zone, in whatever operational unit they wanted. And the contractor, so they were not bound to any zone. And what it did, it discouraged big, better contractors to come in BAM. So, and then in turn, what it did, the contractor, the actual work in the actual, brick work relied on very small contractors, in many cases builders. And that created another issue, which I will mention it again. And so from the organizational architecture, organizational form, this is the idea that they had. And then they introduced the control mechanism across the city. So the control mechanism, imagine that we divide the city in different, we divide the city for different setups, different zones, and then we introduce 2 controlling mechanisms across the city. So what basically we are creating a matrix form of the program, for the program. And what it says that from the managerial point of view, we need to balance the number of human resources for these to the number of the whole operation across the city. It didn't happen. So it was actually, it was up to the controlling organizations to auto-adopt themselves.
Dr. Arefian, could you please summarize?
Yes. And then what you see, they didn't even have the same, so the human resource was not consistent with the general organization form. And there was no shared understanding of that. And so the final process of if someone had examined it before, very simple like this, we could have seen that, of course, there will be a backlog here. Of course, there will be a backlog here. And so in my view, so the organizational architecture that links with funding, human resource, practicalities, from different perspectives, it was missing. And it is actually this multi-perspective framework, we need to have it. So this was BAM. What about the future? I want to get back. I want to get back to the beginning, to the first actually thing. Post-disaster, link policy to practice. Think about policy. Think about the policy very carefully. Think about the organization, consistency, strategic nature, how they are working together, finding the gaps and backlogs and bottlenecks before the implementation, scenario building, but most importantly, we need to reduce the complexities. When we are talking about disaster management, it is not, we need also to think about the disaster risk reduction. We need to have our urban risk profiles in order to save time after the disaster. We need to have some urban systems for built heritage maintenance, for recognizing that is not up to the reconstruction job. If we do what we have to do pre-disaster, our work post-disaster is much easier, is less complex. So post-disaster this, but also pre-disasters, urban risk profile, dealing with urban developmental issues. We shouldn't wait for another disaster to happen to acknowledge and recognize the other values that we have, whatever they are. And I don't know why we don't do it, basically. Who prevents us? And for whatever, disaster is dealing with disasters because of the complexities, is multidisciplinary. And this disciplinary narrow-mindedness is the thing that we all are suffering. Our cities are suffering, our people are suffering from. And if any of us had had a candle, so the situation will be better, in my view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arefian, for this very good introduction to this problem of disaster management and the necessity of having an interdisciplinary approach regarding this issue. I would like to encourage also the participants to write their questions in this question and answer box in the Zoom, and we collect them at the end, and we address each of the speakers that your question is related. Please also mention to which presentation and speaker your question is related, so we can better address your comments or your question. So the next presenter is Dr. Alaedini, who is going to share the result of a project that he had a couple of years ago recently on the disaster earthquake in the Kermanshah province in Iran. Dr. Alaedini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to our audience, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event. The topic that I had given is very general: reconstruction challenges in post-disaster Kermanshah province. But in fact, I will highlight a few things. It's based on a study that we conducted in 2018 and 2019 in 3 counties in the Kermanshah province after the recent earthquake in Kermanshah. The study was actually supposed to develop a monitoring and evaluation system, but in fact we failed to do it. It's my failure. And this project was given, a larger project of several studies was given by the Housing Foundation, which is the main organization in charge of reconstruction activities in Iran. It was given to the University of Tehran, and I was asked to lead one part of it, which was this M&E part. So I will highlight, so we could not really develop an M&E system, but since we did a study there, I will also present the results of what we saw there. And what I would like to highlight is both the important issue of a lack of M&E monitoring and evaluation systems for most projects in Iran. And its lack in an emergency project is really damaging to the project. And still, in Iran, monitoring and evaluation systems are not taken seriously. And this is one thing I will highlight. And the other one is the issue of learning, lessons learned and incorporating those into future activities. As my colleague, Dr. Arefian mentioned, and she talked about the BAM project, and there was another earthquake which took place in 2002, in April 2002 in Kermanshah, and right after it in Qazvin, Hamadan, and Zanjan. And the whole thing was targeted by an important project, which was called EERP. This is a World Bank project. The World Bank provided assistance to the government of Iran for reconstruction in these 4 provinces. And the BAM project was also was assisted by the World Bank. But the EERP, the first one, was developed as a very comprehensive reconstruction project, whereas World Bank's involvement in the BAM was restricted to providing money for construction materials and a few other supervision. activities. Iran has all these experiences. But the other point that I wanted to highlight is that so the Iranian crisis management system has learned a lot, but most of this is learning by doing, and little learning, interactive learning or collective learning. And that's the other issue. You know, for example, there were a number of lessons were learned in the EERP, the more comprehensive one. And it was a sophisticated project because it tried to achieve many things. I've not included this slide here, but it wanted to do all the things that Dr. Arefian just mentioned, you know, building resilience, building capacity, and creating a coordination mechanism, all of that. But many of those issues did not really take place. For example, in another study that I did a couple of years later, after all the capacity building activities had comments in the target areas of the EERP project, still there was little, you know, the capacity that had been built, a lot of it, the sort of the human part of it was lost after a few years, and you could hardly find any trace of those activities. Also participation, which is an important thing. That was also another important lesson learned in EERP, that it's easy to say participation. It's very difficult to actually achieve it. And the other thing is coordination. Now, this project EERP was, because it had that World Bank component, it had a special management, and probably because of that, it had a better coordination. I would say that this more recent activity did not have the same level of coordination. And both in EERP and the project in BAM, both of them suffered from a lack of monitoring and evaluation. Despite all the efforts put into it, they never really developed a serious monitoring and evaluation system. But let's go, so these are the lessons learned, and these are repeated to some extent. You see that these are repeated again in the more recent reconstruction activities. Now, the November 12, 2017 earthquake in Kermanshah affected most of the counties, but mostly in Sarpol-Zahab, Solas Babajani, and Dalahu. These counties were affected more than other counties, and about 600 people died in the Sarpol-Zahab county. And there was a lot of damage to manufacturing, agriculture infrastructure, loss of malls, and housing units. More than 100,000 housing units were damaged, and about 28,000 of them needed complete reconstruction. And Dr. Farnaz Arefian mentioned about the code 2800 for construction. And as you see, despite the fact that these things on the left is the Mehr housing project, which is an important government-sponsored project in Iran, a mega housing project. And you see that the buildings were actually destroyed. And these were very new buildings, and they were destroyed in this earthquake event. And on the right side is a hospital, also a very newly built hospital was destroyed. These are also the destruction you see on the left is the industrial park or industrial estate or zone, and also an office building. So these were also lost. So there was a lot of damage, showing that the goals of resilience and the goals of building a capacity building infrastructure in accord with standards are not really, still not taken seriously. This event shows. So prior to this event, a lot of new constructions had taken place in the area, and a lot of the buildings, in fact, collapsed. now, what were the reconstruction goals in this most recent reconstruction activity? In fact, one problem that I said that we were supposed to do an M&E, and I will talk a little more about that. We could not really figure out the details of the construction goals. This was never really written down. Only general reconstruction goals: reconstructing, repairing, and retrofitting housing units, reconstructing infrastructure, increasing resilience, improving disaster management system. A main part of the activities, however, you saw on the ground was to build housing, meaning that through loans, provision of loans and assistance for the reconstruction and repair of housing. This constituted a major part of the housing foundation. But what are we supposed to do? You know, I had the experience of not able to develop an M&E system. Do you hear my voice? My connection is not very good. Is my voice okay? Thank you. So this was important for us this time to be able to develop. But in fact, we failed even and in the previous earthquake events. But what was our objective? We had to clarify the objectives of the activities and develop indicators, establish an M&E, assess the performance of various projects based on these indicators, and feedback on challenges to project management, document the experiences, and obviously extract the lessons learned. Okay, and what did we focus on? The status of the camps that had been set up, construct housing, including loans, the pace of activities, quality, etc., public and social infrastructure, social issues such as education, participant, psychological issues, etc., and economic, including subsistence, employment, business network, and productive infrastructure. And we really got to go to the area only in 2 rounds. And we focused, in both rounds, we focused on the main city that was affected, and in the counties, in the rural, in the 2 different rounds, we focused on different villages. And this shows that it is obvious that we could not really build an M&E system with only going there to, advise and not being able to really build a system. This also, so I will talk at the end of, in a couple of minutes, about why we failed to do that. I will highlight some of the reasons we failed to create an M&E system. But since we went there, I would like to first point out a few of the things that we observed there. First of all, this was, each of these events are surrounded by special circumstances. In this particular case, the crisis management law was still not adopted after so many years of talking about it. It was adopted in 2019, which called for the creation of framework, specific guidelines and frameworks. So they're now being developed just recently. So these things were still lacking at the time of this, which affected the activities. And so there was the third bullet point that I've written here, the lack of clarity on the context of government activities. Was it supposedly the building back better? Even the top managed, they were so convinced that our one goal was to build back better. They said, no, why should we? These are under very difficult circumstances. We just want to give them, we want them to survive. That's what we're focusing on. We're not focusing on building back better. And this was I was surprised to hear that from the management. It showed that there was no clear goals mechanism for the activities. And also the financial, the extent of financial involvement of the government was never really clear. And they're very big issues. What should the different parts of the government and the public sector really do there? There was a lot of ad hoc activities And so this was very problematic. And also one thing about this event was that you saw the increased role of donations through individual persons, celebrities, which sort of they went there, and people did not trust give their money to government agencies or government sanctioned NGOs, but to celebrities. And they were roaming around the area. Some of them did very good, but some of them did not. And this was a big problem. In some cases, things were running well. Here are some good practices in setting up camps. Everything is organized and neat, as you see in this one. Another case, like in a park, the camp is set up in a park, and the people who were living in the camp were expanding. They wanted to take over actually the park. It was a big problem. Like people, the authorities were not sure whether, and when the houses are built, these people will actually go and live in their own houses, or they want to take over this park. You know, it was not really clear, and it created a lot of antagonism and difficulty. Another thing, for example, was resettlement. This was a village. These villages had to be resettled because their original locations were for example, on steep slopes. But then this was also sort of the framework was not adequate to address the concerns of some of the beneficiaries. Some people said, no, that we want to stay in the old village. Some people moved to the new village, and the total chaos. Again, these are some places, you know, some beneficiaries benefited from the activities of NGOs or the Revolutionary Guard activities. Their houses were built in very quickly. Others were left to struggle. There is another unfulfilled promises was by some NGOs. So you saw a very uneven outcome of the activities. Some of other issues, and if I have just a couple more minutes, I will finish. Construction of infrastructure, inadequate attention given to employment, economic recovery, which we had also, the same lesson was learned in previous events. Full participation, very important was no communication framework. This is very important in disaster, in areas that have been hit by disaster, because you see the spread of rumors, a lot of dissatisfaction and mistrust, and people are in fact benefiting from all the activities of the government agencies, but they also mistrust the same people. This is because information is not circulating adequately. There is no communication framework or adequate communication framework in place. Increasing cost of construction, this has happened every time. And this is partly, and a lot of our audience are economists, you know, we are in Iran, we are always facing, you know, double-digit inflation. And whenever these types of disaster take place, you suddenly see a rise, you see rapid rise of for construction material. And then the loan is not enough. And this all delays everything, a lot of pressure on the agencies carrying out these activities, on the people, etc. Some beneficiaries, again, I said, benefited from more than one program, some did not. And this created a lot of animosity and distance of temporary shelter, a lot of, again, no proper program. A lot of people remained in containers, and the authorities had this dilemma, what to do with these people who don't want to leave. A lot of land issues, again, previous experiences had this, you know, land is a problem in Iran. Land tenure is an issue. When you want to do a reconstruction, area-wide reconstruction, then you have to deal with it. How do you deal with it? And you have to have frameworks prior to the event to be able to handle an emergency situation, and lack of coordination, you know. But why weren't we, my last slide, weren't we able to develop an M&E system? There was a really most important, the most important issue was that an MSM should get its data from all the participants to reconstruction activities. And this should be automatic and routine. We were never able to convince all the actors, and there were so many of them. Each did not trust the other one. They just wouldn't participate in giving us routine. Part of the reason was they thought about security issues, but then they should have done it themselves. If they don't trust, for example, us, the university professors, then they should do an internal one, whatever, you know. And I didn't really want to have data. We wanted to build the system. And they really thought that an M&E system, researchers coming to the area and looking at what's happening, and that's a monitoring and evaluation system. There was no dedicated personnel to this. You know, these agencies really had to put their personnel to this activity, and there was no way we could get them to do this. In the end, we failed, and we could not develop the system. And I don't know if, and the problem is that I don't know if another one in another event, again, we have not really worked on creating at least a framework for an M&E system. Will it be considered for any future event? So I'm done.
Thank you very much.
If I took longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this also interesting, informative presentation on the Kermanshah experience. So we go directly to the third and our final speaker, Dr. Abbas Ostadtaghizadeh, who basically will talk about the experience of flood, the recent large flood in Iran, and how the health system during this disaster got affected and the related issues here. So Dr. Taghizadeh, I think we see also your presentation. The floor is yours. Please also keep the time for 15 minutes so we reach also to the question and answer on time. Yeah. So we have your slide.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
And my slide, how about my slide?
Yes, your slide is also visible.
Okay. Okay, in the name of guide, thank you, Mohammad. Thank you for International Iranian Economic Association and for inviting me in this valuable meeting. My presentation is about the health system resilience for flood in Iran. Both of my colleagues talk about the earthquake, but I want to speak about another aspect of disasters named flood. As you know, recently in the past decade, the number of floods increasing in all of the world, especially in Iran, because of climate change and other climate-related events. In this slide, you can see the flood map, this map of Iran, as you see in Ardabil province and Golestan provinces, we have the high number of deaths in the past decades. The last massive floods that occurred in Iran, it was in March 2019. In this slide, you can see the direct health consequences of this massive flood that affected most of the countries. I mean 27 provinces out of 31 of all of the provinces in Iran. Unfortunately, 85 individuals died and more than 2,000 individuals injured, 65 hospital damage, and more than 500 rural health center damage due to these events, partially or totally. This slide that I take the picture from Doktor city shows one of the most important health center that destroys totally, and after that the authority decided to destroy and reconstruct again this important center.
Ostadtaghizadeh.
And in sorry, yes.
Could you please switch to the presentation mode that we see the whole slide in a presentation mode if you do it?
Press F5.
F5. Is it okay?
Not yet. If you go to the slideshow, I suppose under the menu of slideshow, and then select the full screen or the full.
Yeah, this is the full screen.
It doesn't show the full screen, but I think that is fine if you still want to continue. That is okay.
I see it in full screen, but I'm not sure what's the problem. Sorry.
Sorry.
This picture, you can see the level of the water that flooded all of the centers. For example, it shows that more than 2 meters of water filled in all of the centers. Okay, what was the objective of this study? We want to evaluate the health system activities for disaster risk management during flood 2019, and to provide some scientific recommendation for health system resilience against flood. There was some, important questions come from presidential, President of Iran. The main question was what was the quality of health response to flood? What was the weaknesses? What was the quality of guideline and protocols? What was the health system coordination and communication during the flood? And the other, the other questions was the how well is the country prepared for such disaster? What was the role of public participation, and etc. I have to skip from some slide because of the limitation of time. We researched and investigated a lot of, field of health systems, such as environmental systems, mental health, rehabilitation, search and rescue, sheltering, coordination, commanding, hospital services, nutrition, controlling the communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases, and as well as international humanitarian aids. We use the different method for gathering the data, such as a specific question from a different organization, field visit. We conducted a lot of deep interview with experts, with authorities, and filled some semi-questionnaire study and questionnaire. As you see, for example, we have a lot of, meeting with Iranian Red Crescent Society, with universities, with Health System, Ministry of Health, and with the military system. Why? Because the role of military system is so important in response to disasters. And what is the finding? I want to just mention some important issues in, our findings. The first one is what health system preparedness for flood. Fortunately, in the past decades, Ministry of Health, as well as the Iranian Red Crescent societies, electricity organization and other organizations, other ministries prepared emergency operation plan. As you see in this slide, for example, I show you the emergency operation plan of Iranian Red Crescent Society and Ministry of Health. But it is so important that after preparing a general, comprehensive, an all-hazard plan for responding and prevention from different.
I think we're not seeing you changing your slides. Are you still on slide 6 or you moved on? I think.
I'm slide in 15 right now.
I think it got stuck somehow. Maybe you want? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Is it okay?
Now we can see. Thank you.
Okay, I'm right now in the slide number 15. Okay.
Yes.
Can I continue?
Yes. That works now. Thank you.
Okay. This is so important after developing all hazard plan for response and preparing for disaster. We need and implement hazard specific plans. It means one of the most important, lesson learned from, this event was that we need to develop hazard specific plans. We need to develop a flood, response plans and fire response plan and other kind of disasters. The second that we learned was that the level of the surveillance systems, one of the most important issue and concern that we have as a health worker is that outbreak of disease. Why? Because a lot of the infrastructure such as sanitation systems will destroy after flood, will destroy after earthquake, and we are concerned about the outbreak of disasters such as cholera, such as ELTOR, and other gastrointestinal diseases. But fortunately, despite all concern, we didn't have any significant outbreak reported by Ministry of Health. We think that increasing the sensitivity of surveillance systems, as Pooya said, the monitoring and evaluation system is so important. For example, if we increase the level of sensitivity in coronavirus surveillance systems, I think we could, monitor and manage better this pandemic in Iran. And another thing, cooperation of other disciplines is so important. Concerning public participation, as Farnaz said, one of the most important things that we need to focus on it is public participations. Fortunately, a lot of NGOs, CBOs, jihadi groups, and charities, and even the individuals participated in responding and helping to the people. But this is so important that most of them of spontaneous public participation, without any plan, without any organizations, and we learned that sometimes not standards, public participations, non-professional participations, unequal services can harm the people and is not appropriate for response. It means that we need to organize public participation, we need to institutionals, and we need an you know, a planned and institutionalized public participation instead of spontaneous public participation. Concerning the, you know, the coordination, I have to say that in flood 2019, every authorities, I mean, for example, Ministry of Health, Iranian Red Crescent societies, and other organizations have own emergency operations center. But without an appropriate collaboration and coordination with each other. For example, there was a weak coordination among the health emergency operations center and other stakeholders such as military forces. It means that for an appropriate coordination, we should have developed integrated and comprehensive cooperation center. Unfortunately, until now, we don't have a national coordination center, and hope in the future we conduct an advanced coordination center for preparing and response to disaster. The fifth thing that I want to say is international humanitarian aid. So fortunately, we receive a lot of humanitarian, you know, assistance. But the most important and one of the most important issue that we should consider, in humanitarian assistance should be based on the needs. It means that we need to do an appropriate post-disaster need assessment for announcements of international humanitarian assistance. A lot of the countries, a lot of the international organizations send a lot of, you know, equipments to Iran that we didn't need to them. For example, a lot of, you know, emergency kits sent to Iran, but in this flood, we didn't need to, you know, this equipment. And unfortunately, after a while, most of them was expired and we have to destroy all of them. The next issue is health system communications. Weakness of a sustainable multi-layer communication system influence on health systems, especially in early response, you know, phase. Okay, we know that the economic sanction influence on health system, and we should, you know, educate all of the staff concerning using different kind of system, you know, communication systems such as satellites, mobile systems, and other systems for communication. The next one that I want to say is about the health information system. Unfortunately, in Iran, you know, the information gathered in unstandard, you know, way. We have in some parts we didn't have access to the information. In some part, the information was not, you know, validated. In some part of the country, the information was gathered in a different, you know, format, in a different way. And integration, all of this is not possible for health system. It means that we need to provide a unified and integrated information system with a valid, unified, and user-friendly information system. I'm not sure that I have much time or not, Mohammad. How much time I have?
About 1 minute, if you able.
Okay. I try to finish my lecture about 2 minutes. Concerning the health system relief system, okay, you know, the quality of health system services were overloaded. It means there are a lot of services that provided by different organizations. But the question is that how much of this services was needed. We need to evidence-based services, non-political services, equal services, culturally adjusted health and relief services, need-based services as unified and comprehensive services. Concerning the health system risk understanding, you know, the health system understanding is so important. We should invest in local health worker education and as well as for improving the skill, improving the knowledge of the authority, the knowledge of managers is so important. Why? Because based on our studies, one of the most important things for improving disaster resilience in Iran is focusing on the, managerial competency is so important. And the last one that I want to say is health system debriefing. We expected that all of the health worker and other worker and responder to disaster work under pressure, work very hard for a long time, but we should consider that they are human. They own families are affected by the flood. They need some mental health support. They need some, social support, and this is so important that unfortunately neglected in the response. In conclusion, when we talk about the health system resilience, when we talk about the resilience, we should consider that the resilience is a dimensional issue. We should consider managerial and institutional issue such as legislation, as Farnaz explained and mentioned. We should consider environmental issue. We should consider social issue. We should consider the cultural issues such as the ethnicity and etc. etc. Okay, I just finished my lecture, and I hope all of you be safe in all of the world. Thank you for your resilience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh, for this practical presentation and your experience from the field and in the management of disaster since years ago. So we have received a couple of good questions, which in the remaining time, we would like to discuss them with the presenters and to know what they think about these comments and questions. So there is a possibility that we ask the people who have raised the question to speak and present the question themselves. So Kamiar, if possible for you, that we start from the question of Dr. Mohaddes. I suppose the question of Dr. Mohaddes is related to the first speaker, and it would be good that if present his questions, if it's possible himself, otherwise I will read it.
Hamid Jun befrmایید.
سلام خانم عارفیان، متشکرم از پرزنتیشن خیلی جالبتون. صدا منو میشنوین؟
بله، صدای شما رو داریم. خانم عارفیان، دکتر عارفیان
شما میوت هستین.
ببخشید، بله میشنوم.
خواهش میکنم، مرسی. دو تا سوال داشتم. یکی این تفاوت این مثلا زلزله منجیل خیلی قبل از انقلاب بود تا اونجا که خاطرم میاد. مثلا تفاوت pre-revolutionary institutional improvements that you mentioned and after revolution. Was there a difference in the two eras? Was one more effective versus the other one? What have we learned in terms of, after all, the revolution was supposed to mobilize the energies of the masses and so on. So that was one question that I raised. And then the other one was the fact that this contractor was roaming around across all the regions, and yet everyone else was sort of was confined to particular areas. So I was wondering if there was a maybe political connection of that contractor, or what was, or was it whether there's a scarcity of large contractors? I was trying to get at the source of that, whether it's more economic monopoly or whether it's more sort of the just general good old corruption factor and those kinds of things.
Thank you very much. Manjil, I think, was in 1990s, so it was after revolution.
Oh, it was. Oh, okay. That was okay.
Yes,
I stand corrected.
It was after revolution. But Boeing Zahra, for example, was before.
Oh, that's right.
Before revolution. And the thing is that what I like about the reconstruction management, the organizational continuity, that they took the lessons from even before revolution. For example, in Boeing Zahra, there was a case of relocation. So building a village in another place, the whole village. And what they found was that after some years, actually, no one was living in that new village. Instead, I see. Villagers using the new village for their, cattle, basically, not living there. So they took the lessons from pre-revolution. I think that's good. So the lesson is combined, the experience is combined. With regard to the contractors, it was my question too, basically. What I was told, because I did a whole research around the whole thing. I was told that the decision was because to give people choice. So when the participation of people means that at some point people, they are not just robots. They need to have some choices to. So this was the answer that I got.
But in this case, it was just one contractor.
It was not one contract. So they hope to attract, good big contractors. But to be honest, I think the number of, well-established, famous contractors was not as
I see.
It was needed.
It was inadequate.
And yes, and the issue that we want to give people more choice, so they are not confined with everyone, basically. Which, in my view, it discouraged good contractors, because consultants, printer, computer, paper, human resource, but contractors, you have big equipments. So imagine from this part of the city to that part of the city. So it make difficult for good contractors to be a viable project, in my view.
So large contractors were hard to come by, in a sense.
Exactly, they didn't come.
Thank you.
Dr. Nader Habibi has also raised a question regarding the role of military in disaster management. It was also mentioned during the presentation in some slides, the role of military in Iran, and we know that has a strong presence. The question is to Dr. Alaedini. Dr. Habibi, would you like to present your question yourself directly? In that case, Kamiar, can you please?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
absolutely.
So thank you very much, both you and Kamiar, for organizing these talks. My question for Dr. Alaedini is about the IRGC, the Republican Revolutionary Guards. Sorry, not Republican. I have been tracking their economic activities, and I'm very interested in knowing, based on what you observed in Kermanshah in 2018 and 2019, what was their involvement, what was their level of efficiency, and what were the challenges of coordination between the Revolutionary Guards and the Rouhani government? I'm asking that last one because we have often heard of the tensions between the presidency and the Revolutionary Guards. Khatam al-Anbiya. Thank you.
Of course, I did not focus that in our study for obvious reasons, but we did visit villages in which the Sepah were active, and they had carried out construction activities, and they were quite efficient. They finished the units that they had promised fairly quickly. Given their resources, they could do that. But this does not mean that they were involved in all the villages. They had selected certain villages. I'm not certain why certain villages were targeted by the reconstruction arm of the Sept. That I cannot tell. But they were pretty efficient in what they did, given their resources. Was there any tension? There again, I was not involved in the top management to sense any tension. There was always tension, in these types of under these circumstances. There is always tension among various actors, because their level of involvement is not really clear. And as I said, there is a coordination issue. What should each of these actors really do? That's not, I'm not saying it's absolutely chaos. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a lack of coordination. So again, for example, if there was any, we sensed any sort of animosity between these various actors, including, for example, other authorities in charge of reconstruction and the activities of IRCG. Again, I could attribute that to many things, to just lack of coordination. I could not really attribute it to a higher level antagonism. That I cannot do. So I could not really answer your question very well, but I would like to add that if SEPA was able to carry out its activities so quickly and efficiently, then they would have done it everywhere. But this was not the case. This was not the case. They were only active in certain areas, which suggests sort of symbolic presence in those instances, or tokenism, these you could sense. Yeah. Thank you
very much, Pooya, for the comments on the role of revolution regarding construction of places after disaster. So we conclude with two further questions, and then would be in our time framework, which we plan for the event. So one question is from Dr. Arefian, from Dr. Sandoval, from Free University Berlin. So if Dr. Sandoval, you prefer, you can also directly present your question to Dr. Arefian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the question is about the presentation. You show clearly how urban development and disaster reconstruction operate after the BAM earthquake in 2003. However, I would like to know if something, if you perceive some development, evolution from what happened, because there is a long time since that happened, and regarding there's some lessons or there's some changes to be highlighted, considering the situation more recently that was presented, for instance, from the 2019 floods, or in the sense of governance, for instance, and if you maybe bring some insights or some comments about that, would be much appreciated.
Sure, Vicente. So nice to see you here. After the BAM earthquake, what happened? We see improvements, actually. At two levels. Let me talk about two levels. One, the construction industry You know, we see improvements. The BHRC developed some more regulations with regard to traditional buildings, you know, traditional vernacular architecture, and make them earthquake resistant, that sort of things. But I think your question is more about urban development side, you know, the risk, and I think is also kind of related to what Hind was asking. With regard to urban development, to be honest, I don't see that we have improved a lot. If I get back to the talk, Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh, about flood, you know, when we cover a floodway and build a shopping center on top of that, we are calling for a disaster. And it happens, it still happens. So yeah, I think with regard to urban development, we still have a long, you know, way to go. But with regard to the construction industry, we have improved a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arefian, for commenting on the question. We have one final question from Dr. Manacher Tekin. So I suppose this question can be at best answered by Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh, given his long experience at the managerial levels within the Iranian administration. Dr. Tekin, would you like to?
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure.
Well, I would like to thank really the speakers with this authoritative explanation and analysis, because what we had heard was been generally from newspapers and different wings, political issues, political, and so these were really informative. I would like to thank all of them, all the panelists. And the other point, if I may say, that I had a personal experience in the 1970s, writing, doing a study of the earth and geology post Qir Karzin earthquake, which happened in Fars province. And so I felt with the speakers the tragedy and that hard situation to see the adobes huts collapsing, but also the infirmary of Qir, which was a modern building at that time with cement and iron and bricks, that also had collapsed. And if I missed nothing to be personal again, that with the Pole Dukhtar, I worked there and I did a geological map of that area myself. So I really have personal feelings for them. But my question is that these wonderful presentations, analyses, give the shortcomings, and they are addressing someone that they should have done that. Or there is an invisible listener or someone who is these talks are addressed to. But to be generalist and something specific, maybe both, is if from their experiences, should there be a greater role of government in these things or the private sector? Of course, there is an immediate disaster, post-disaster action, and then the reconstruction, that the roles would be different. If they feel like the panelists to air their views, this is a general debate everywhere in the world, the role of government and the private sector in all these issues. If they feel like it, I appreciate to listen to them. Thank you.
Can I say something on that?
Yes, sure.
Not from Iran case, from Lebanon. That actually post-disaster reconstruction became a private sector matter. Actually, the government created a company, a private company, to rebuild Beirut. And it created a whole of disaster capitalism. And in my view, it's better not to do that, because it is a disaster itself on its own. And yeah, I think the government should take the major role in, and then delegate some of the roles with the private sector, not wholly delegate everything with private sector. So it is from another country's experience, actually.
I would like to also add to that, if I'm allowed. From the perspective of economists, mainstream economists also accept the expanded role of government when there are market failures. Under the disaster circumstances, there is a huge market failure. People who have been affected, they will not, institutions are not there to create, there is no institutional infrastructure to address these market failures. And definitely the role of government must be large. Now, if there are countries that have strong private sectors, I don't know, and the system of check and balances, all these things, then you could increase the role of the private sector. I would say that it's as Farnaz just mentioned, it could create some sort of the disaster capitalism, which is the capitalist part is not a problem. The problem is that it's a crony type of capitalism.
Good. Interesting. Yes, Dr. Ostadtaghizadeh.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the role of private sector, as I experienced in the past disaster, we should consider two main issues. The role of the private sector in disaster. What is the role of the role of private sector to respond to disaster? Unfortunately, we didn't see anything. We didn't see less in responding to the disasters concerning the private sector. Most of the activities was conducted by the individuals, was conducted by the charities, by NGOs and military and governmental organization, but the private sector is less involved in the response. Another issue that I want to say is that, we should involve all of the private sector, and they should responsible to their activities. For example, a factory can miss and neglect all of the regulations and neglect and miss all of the HSE regulations and PPE and etc. etc. And when a disaster or an emergency happens, for example, the fire organization and other organizations have to respond to this this event. It means that the private sector have mistakes, but the responsibility is related to the governmental organization. It means that we should consider the role of the private sector in responding, in prevention of disasters, and etc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have still 2-3 very interesting questions, which Kamiar told me that possible that we extend a little bit more. So Dr. Mohaddes has a question regarding another type of natural disaster. He's asking, maybe each of you want to comment on that very briefly. We have focused on dramatic events such as earthquake and floods. What can be said about the response to gradual disasters such as droughts, for example, in Khuzestan, Ahti, or Khoshsali, let's Khoshsali in that sense. What do you think about this issue? We talk about floods and response to earthquake, but what about a type of events which is happening slowly, but has a very dramatic effects on the socio-economic situation of the people, especially the clear example of Khuzestan? Is there any specific plan or in that type of disasters?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, beside of the Sendai Framework for Action, the United Nations, issued another, another document concerning controlling climate change related, such as floods, such as drought, such as, sand and dust storm, and etc., and other, chronic disasters. I mean, entitled COP21. The two main, strategies are considered for, combating with drought and other kind of the chronic disasters. The first one is mitigation. It means that we should decrease the amount of CO2 in the air. And the second one that is so important for the community, that's for the health system and other systems, is climate change adaptation. We need to develop adaptation plan. Fortunately, we develop right now in the Tehran University of Medical Sciences a model for assessment the level of community climate change adaptations. The first thing for management an issue is evaluating this issue. Without evaluation, we don't care, we don't manage, the issue. Right now, we have a model for evaluation the level of adaptation against the drought, and develop some plans for implementation, especially in health system, not other system, for example, environmental organization and etc. I can share with you this, article that published in interview in, peer-reviewed and international journals.
All right, thank you very much. The next question, Kamiar, Hind Al-Shubaki.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Actually, my question is about risk-based spatial planning. Actually, when Professor Arefian started talking about the objectives during the reconstruction process, so we are talking about the heritage, we are talking about social recovery and the safe reconstruction. So my question is about how could spatial planning, how could we activate the role of spatial planning in managing and fulfilling these objectives, and if could we expand our objectives through spatial planning, or it's like they are fixed about these this 3 points of or 3 objectives. So thank you.
Many thanks, Hind. In my view, the whole point of spatial planning is to guide us in a right direction for a city or a neighborhood or whatever scale we are doing. So if we have done our risk-based spatial planning, and if we are we stick to it, basically, because many, in Iran, for example, we have this kind of risk assessment during the urban development, preparing urban development plans. But in practice, some of them are ignored. They can be ignored if they, if they want it. I think having it can help, it can guide. If we are having, for example, in another city in Hoi An, Vietnam, if we are having a urban heritage maintenance system at large scale, and make it as a kind of urban governance for that historic center, of course it is helpful for whatever happens after that.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about doing what we must do in a right way and in the right time. So, but it's a very big question, and I'm happy to continue with this with you, for your own work, of course.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thanks a lot, highly appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Given the remaining time, so we conclude really this time with the last three questions. So Dr. Pesaran has also a question regarding disaster funds. Dr. Pesaran?
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed my concern was, are they designated contingency funds? I mean, it seems most governments, in order to deal with this, obviously it's quite correct that the role of government is paramount in management of disaster and emergency is clear. But in order to deal with the financial side of it and also move quickly, you really need to push for designated funds, which are protected by law and not used till the disaster happens. I just wanted to know whether there's any, I don't know anything about it, but I just don't know whether there are such funds and whether people have talked about it. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. Is there any information from panelists on this fund?
Not on this fund, but on, for example, humanitarian fund, basically, you know, from other countries, or emergency loan from the World Bank, which again, based on what I've seen, when something happens, many countries promise, you know, and often promises are not fulfilled. And another thing is that the emergency funds that, for example, the World Bank, Pooya, I'm sure Pooya knows this better. For example, the loan by the World Bank, it could not go through, you know, as the same amount because of the sanctions. Because of, there are many practical obstacles to use the fund that is needed for post-disaster recovery, not only reconstruction.
I suppose the question, if you combine Hashem's questions with Hamid's questions, which is severity and frequency of natural disasters and heat waves and cold waves are increasing, should there not be a fund which is protected and not depending on other countries, but domestic funds which are available to quickly help, particularly if sanctions are in place and funds cannot be channeled through the places in time? Pooya might know. I don't know.
No, several things. As I mentioned, the law that has been passed, it has called for the preparation of guidelines. Some of these guidelines are related to, or at least parts of them, to financial issues. But to be honest with you, I haven't been involved since the coronavirus hit. I haven't really been involved in it. So I'm not sure what has been approved and what has been prepared. But another possibility in Iran has been accessing the National Reserve Fund, which everybody has been accessing it. So this can be done every time, with the permission from the top political figure in the country. That can be accessed and that is available, the National Reserve Fund. Yeah.
Right, John. I know it's the time short, but what I had in mind was that when disaster happened, there is funds become released almost automatically. Obviously, they say there is a disaster, like it happens in other parts of the world. They say, well, the BAM was a disaster. As soon as that's declared by the government, then the funds which are associated with earthquakes, for example, becomes available automatically. And there are procedures by which people can apply, for building the roads, for houses or whatever. I mean, even initially just getting the food and the water and the heating and so on to them. It's just so critical nowadays, as Kamiar said. I mean, Iran has had also high frequency of disaster anyway. We don't have to predict more disaster. We have had enough disaster, in my opinion, to tell us as a nation, it is the government and the people's role, so that they have automated systems, so that this happens quicker and the release comes quicker. By the time waiting for other countries to help us and with the sanction, it seems to me is an area which self-reliance seems to be justified even economically. It may not be justified in other areas. So I would recommend you guys to push for it, in my view.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I suppose Dr. Karshnas also raised his hand.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Well, thank you for a very interesting session. And, there are two themes which are common to all the presentations. And one is that despite frequent disasters, there is lack of learning from the previous mistake. And the second one is lack of coordination. So is there a permanent type of agency, disaster management agency in Iran, which can really address these issues? You need cumulative knowledge to be gathered somewhere and use of experts like yourselves. So within the presidency or any of the ministries, do we have a permanent disaster management institute agency which can take responsibility for this sort of coordinations and learning, or is it just ad hoc and as disasters happen, they're dealt with? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Karshnas. We have a lot of, experiences and past history concerning how could we manage the different disasters. It's referred to, I think, in Qajar, era. But after BAM earthquake, the government decided to issue an organization, under supervision of Interior Ministry, entitled National Disaster Management Organization. The first, regulation concerning National Disaster Management Organization was issued in, I think, 16 years ago. 13 years ago in 1387, I think. Fortunately, after a while, in 2020, last year, the permanent legislation of disaster management was passed and issued by Iranian parliament. And right now we have a national organization for permanent monitoring, permanent prevention of disasters, especially natural disasters. But as I explained, this is a young, organization. It's not an old organization. The main issue that we should consider, and I as a academic person always say that one of the most important actions that should be done by this organization is coordination. Unfortunately, I explained in my presentation, we have a lot of emergency operations center. We have an emergency operations center for coordination, for collaboration, for communication, for controlling, and etc., in Ministry of Health, in Ministry of Power, and etc. But at the national level, unfortunately, we don't have an 24/7, national emergency operations center. And I know that they are, trying to develop new one in sort of Tehran near the Imam Khomeini airport, but is not, established right now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas Ostadtaghizadeh. I would like to thank all the panelists for wonderful presentations and insights that they share with us regarding the disaster management in Iran. In this interdisciplinary dialogue, I would like also to thank the International Iranian Economic Association for planning and organizing these monthly webinars and dialogues. And this is a very interesting and good initiative that the association has started. And I would also like to thank all the participants who stayed with us until now. It's close to 19, and I give the space to Kamiar, wanted to inform the forthcoming events of the association.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I really enjoyed the discussion, and there's so many more questions. We couldn't take all of them, but thank you so much to the panelists and to Mohammad for organizing. Just a reminder that we meet every month, and next panel will be chaired by our very own Moderator, and will be on a session on women and work. And after that, we have our very own Hassan Hakimian, who's also will be chairing a session on social policy in Iran. And we will finish off this year with a keynote chaired by Javad and taught by Essie. So hope to see you in a month's time. Thanks so much. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.